Well, that was fun. Now it's time to do it all over again. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, then please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. So the first round of the NFL draft came and went. It was certainly intriguing to say the least. The Cleveland Browns traded out of the second pick. They traded away the chance to draft Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter. Traded back to 5 with the Jaguars. If you haven't seen my reaction on that from last night, go check that one out. Was a little bit tired, but gave my thoughts on it. So I won't waste too much time on that pick now, as we're going to be talking about this all off season, I am sure, about how the Browns, traded back and took Mason Graham instead of taking Travis Hunter. Yes, it was disappointing at first to have Travis Hunter put on a platter right in front of you for it to just be then snatched away last second. But the more I've slept on it, I've had about 4 hours sleep, 5 hours sleep maybe at a push. I've had some sleep. I've had some time to process it, digest it a bit more. And as I said, yes, it is disappointing face value to not see Travis Hunter play for the Cleveland Browns, but the Cleveland Browns got a haul for that pick. You can't deny that. They got a pretty good haul, and they still landed arguably, in my opinion, a top 5 player in the draft. You look at any of the analytical models that try and work out value stuff in all of these trades, and the Browns absolutely ran away, with the value that they got back. It's basically the equivalent of 2 first-round picks, near enough. Whatever way you look at it, it's great value. All of the NFL analytical nerdier type guys, shall we say, they all love the move. Of course they do. As I said, it comes in at great value for the Browns. You pick up a future first-round pick just to drop down 3 spots. You also pick up pick 36 as well. Will the Jaguars be good next year? The bookies don't think they'll be great. I think their current wins is at 7.5. That could be another top 10 pick. If it is, people will be sat here next year saying that was a great trade. I understand that a lot of people don't want to hear that now, and they don't want to hear the whole nerdy trade analytical stuff. Completely get it. People are more than entitled to be annoyed about this. I'm still a little bit annoyed. I was that ready for Travis Hunter, but I do. You've got to take it for what it is sometimes. And even if you are annoyed, you can't deny that the Browns got a really good haul for this trade back. Because if they didn't, then yes, then pitchforks would be out, and there would be burning at the stake would be calling for. But that haul that they got now means that the Browns will have 4 picks on day 2 of the draft today, including 2 top 40 picks. AB spoke after the trade back and after the pick that they felt that the sweet spot this year in the draft was day 2. So there's no coincidence that they added more day 2 picks, brought in that extra second round pick. It does put them in a unique position to load up on talent during day 2 with, a lot of good players still on the board. So let's talk about some of those guys and, what I think the Browns should do for day 2. Versus what I think they'll actually do for day 2. For me, there's a fairly short list of players that should be in consideration at 33 and 36. They are quarterbacks Jalen Milroe and Shadur Sanders, running backs Trevion Henderson and Caleb Johnson, wide receiver Luther Burden, safety Nick Emanwari, cornerback Will Johnson, and defensive end Nick Scroughton. Now, any of my subscribers can probably guess already that I want Jalen Milroe. I've spoken about him as my top quarterback option all off season if the Browns were able to get him at 33, and they could probably get him at 36. So, I understand why people don't see the need to go QB, especially now with, picking up an extra first next year. Gives you more chance to, if not be in position to draft a quarterback, then, move into position to draft a quarterback with that extra first. But, having the second round pick this off the Jaguars just gives me more of a reason to do it, to be honest. Take a flyer on Milroe, draft a skill position player, and then, if Milroe doesn't work out, it doesn't stop you from drafting a quarterback next year. You can argue that that's a waste of a pick if that's the case, but, the pick might not work out regardless of what position they play. That's just the NFL draft. I'd rather take a flyer on the most important position in sports. As I said, if it doesn't work out, drafting someone in the second round this year doesn't stop you from going quarterback next year. So I would draft Jalen Milroe, and I also wouldn't even be against taking Shedeur here either if that's what they wanted to do instead. I think Milroe has a higher upside, but Shedeur has a higher floor. I'd probably feel more confident if Shedeur had to start in week 8 than I would in Milroe. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But why not take a flyer on quarterback? As I said, I get it. Some people might think it's a wasted pick, especially if they have their mind on quarterback next year. But you can never guarantee next year. Something that I always try to stress on here is that, yes, you might have what people perceive as a generational prospect waiting, at quarterback next year, but that's next year. By the time we get there, there's so many things that could happen, injuries, drop off in play, you just never know. So the idea of, we don't need to do that because we'll do it next year, I just think is a little bit misguided, and it's all good in theory to talk about it. Yeah, we can do this next year, but then next year comes and none of the guys are good, or you don't have you're not in the position to draft one. Then what do you say then? So, as I said, I'd take Milroe. If they want to take Sanders, I'd be fine with that as well. Take a flyer. It's a day 2 pick. If it doesn't work, it doesn't stop you from going quarterback next year. But don't just bank everything on next year, because I just don't think that's the best way of operating. Then what to do with the next pick is the interesting part. For me, it would probably come down to Luther Burden, Nick Emenwari, Will Johnson, or one of the running backs. Luther Burden is one of my favourite wide receivers this year. I haven't spoken about him too much because, with the assumption that the Browns would have taken Hunter, it kind of eliminated that need to go wide receiver early. But wide receiver is certainly a need for this Browns team. Other than Jerry Jeudy, they've only really got Cedric Tillman, David Bell, and Jamari Thrash on the team. There's not much experience there. There's not much production there. There's only a couple players there that even have more than 50 career receptions. So it's certainly in need. Luther Burden, is one of my favourite wide receiver prospects. He is one of the better wide receiver prospects left on the board. Certainly someone that I would be looking at. Nick Emenwari could solve the safety dilemma. He is one of the most athletic players we've ever seen at the Combine, probably the most athletic player ever coming out of the safety position that we've ever seen, and is still really, really young. Basically the perfect archetype for an Andrew Berry pick. I don't know if it's my first choice, but it's certainly a move that I would be happy about. I've spoken quite a lot on here about the need for safety. Some people want to go a bit later. I'd understand if they did go later, maybe a Billy Bowman. But I wouldn't have too many quarrels with going with Nick Emenwari here. Would completely get the move. Positional versatility as well in the safety room. You could put him at free safety, but you could also, interchange him with Delpit as well. I just think that would provide, a great asset in that safety room, something that the Browns really need. Will Johnson is the wild card. This is a borderline top 12 player in the draft that's fallen because of injury concerns. Do the Browns have those same concerns? If not, they probably feel the value is too high to pass up on. Do they need a corner? Not necessarily, but as I said, he's a potential top 12 player in the draft, regardless of position, and the Browns could still trade Greg Newsome. And then for the running backs, again, I've spoken all off-season about how badly the Browns need to draft their next running back one, and they have a chance to do that with guys like Trevion Henderson, Caleb Johnson, and even a Quinshon Judkins still on the board. I'd be happy with any of them. Caleb Johnson has been my guy, pretty much most of the off-season. But I don't think the Browns go running back at 33 or 36. With most of those guys still on the board, I think it's more likely they probably target running back at 67, someone like a Devin Neal. But Caleb Johnson could still be there at 67 as well, which, if that was the case, then I would certainly have to pull the trigger. So if I had to make the picks right now, if I was Andrew Berry right now, for me, I would probably go Milroe and Burden, but as I said, I'd be happy with any combination of Jalen Milroe, Shadur Sanders, Luther Burden, Will Johnson, Nick Emanwari, Trevion Henderson, or Caleb Johnson. Now, to what I think the Browns will actually do, because, we all wanted Hunter, or, some people wanted Carter, myself included. We all had these things of what we wanted to do, and more often than not, the Browns won't do that, and they won't do what we all want them to do, and they will go a different route. Not that that's always a bad thing, but, what I think is more likely that Andrew Berry will do versus myself. Firstly, I wouldn't be surprised if they traded one of these picks, probably pick 33. That pick has been traded, I think, 5 times in the last 10 drafts. It's a very, very tradable pick. Any team that wants to come up for a player that fell out of the first, they will be calling. Will Johnson will gather some phone calls, I am sure. So I think it is in play for the Browns to trade this pick for even more picks. To be honest, I personally wouldn't, because, you already have another 4 top 100 picks. Just not really sure what adding a couple more later on really does. I mean, granted, if you need to get another haul for the 33 pick, then yeah, sign me up. But for what I think you could get there, I'm just not sure there's really that much of a need with how many picks they have in the top 100 already. But it is certainly in play, so do not be surprised if they trade the pick. The Browns were on the clock going into round 1 already, because we all knew the Tennessee Titans were taking Cam Ward. So, the Browns were on the clock all day leading up to that for them just to trade it away. The same could be said for day 2. The Browns could be on the clock all day just for the draft to start and the Browns to trade that pick. But if they don't trade the pick, I also don't think it's a guarantee they go quarterback, to be honest. Whilst I'd rather they did, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they passed on Milroe and Sanders, took 2 skill position players or a defensive player as well, and then targeted a quarterback later on. Probably would be Kyle McCord. To be honest, the more I think about it, the more likely I think that is the outcome it will be. So, whilst all the discussions today will be about the quarterbacks, you're going to see so many Shadur Sanders to the Cleveland Browns posts and people talking about it. But don't be shocked if the Browns go a completely different route. As I said, I would not be surprised if they pass up on Milroe and Shadur Sanders, don't plan on going quarterback early, and instead target someone later, like a Will Howard, like a Kyle McCord. Whatever you do, just do not draft Tyler Show any round, especially not at 33 or 36. That is all I'm going to say. I think Mason Taylor could 100% be in play at 33 or 36 as well. You know, that might be slightly earlier than, expected for him. But he ticks every box as a Browns prospect with his athletic profile and the fact that he's still only 20 years old. So if I had to guess what I think Andrew Berry and the Browns will actually do with these picks, I think they probably trade one of them and or draft a combination of Mason Taylor, Nick Emenwari, Will Johnson or Luther Burden. I think that's probably the most likely outcome. Then look to target running back and maybe, offensive line with picks 67 and 94. Again, I would personally rather that they took a flyer on Jalen Milroe. And no, it's not just because I want to look like I knew what I was talking about with being someone that's talked about Jalen Milroe all off season, even back when people would laugh at me for doing so. But I would understand if they go a different route. And to be honest, whatever route they do go, they've got a lot of options in day 2 and in the rest of this draft. The trade back was a good haul. It sucked in the moment, but it is a good haul. As I said, the Browns have so many options now. They have a chance to go and nail day 2 and add a lot of good football players to this team. As I said, there's still a lot of good football players on the board. The Browns have still got 2 top 40 picks. They got 4 picks in total on day 2 today. That's 2 seconds and 2 thirds. So plenty of opportunity to nail these picks, move around if they want to, but use these picks to add some really good football players to this team. Regardless, it's going to be a very interesting day 2. As I said, the Browns have 4 picks, plenty of opportunities. I thought last night was tough staying up. I think it was about 5:30 a.m. when I finally put my head down on my pillow. But tonight is going to be even harder, staying up even later. I'm going to need a nap before the second round starts. I think that is for sure. But excited for it, ready to do it all again tonight. And before I go, I will just touch on some of the other teams around in the draft, especially the AFC North teams. People will hate on the Bengals pick. I get it. Shamar Stewart was pretty unproductive in college, but the upside's there. I liked him as a prospect. I think he has high upside. If he can fulfill that potential, then that's a great pick for the Bengals, as much as it pains me to say. If it doesn't work out, great. If it turns out that lack of production doesn't translate into the NFL as well, then great. But I don't think that pick deserves the laughs that a lot of people have been giving it. I think Shamar Stewart, yes, the production wasn't there, but he ticks all the boxes in terms of athletic profile at the edge rusher position. So would not be surprised if that ends up being a good pick for the Bengals. I'm surprised that the Steelers didn't go quarterback. I like Derek Harmon, but it does feel like a bit of an underwhelming pick for Pittsburgh. But obviously they felt the need was high enough. Then as for the Ravens, I'm just sick of this shit, man. Like, every year they just sit there and have great players fall into their laps. Malachi Starks at 27. I mean, he's arguably a top 10 player in this draft. If he was there at 33, I would have ran to Green Bay from the UK to put the pick in. It's just always the fucking case with the Ravens, man. Like, how do they keep doing it? How do they keep lucking out in the draft? They always just sit there and have great football players fall into their laps. It's annoying. I'm sick of it. And once again, it happens for the Ravens. So pretty annoying about that one. New York trading back into the first for Jackson Dart is hilarious. I mean, I wouldn't have given that haul up for any of the quarterback. Milroe, Shadur Sanders, especially not Dart. And they did it for, arguably the 4th best quarterback in the draft. Just wild. certainly helped bring the mood back up, seeing that, seeing it and then knowing that the Browns were going to, if they wanted to go quarterback, they would have had, the pick of the two guys they probably would have most likely targeted anyway without having to give anything up. So, yeah, seeing that was quite hilarious. Did bring a smile to my face. You've got a front office and a head coach there that are on the hot. People want to say that Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry are on the hot seat. Dabo and Schoen over there really, really are on the hot seat, and they've decided to trade back into the first for Jackson Dart and, hang their future onto that. So good luck to them. Then I nearly spat out my coffee when the Falcons trade came through. Giving up a future first to move to 26 is wild, especially for James Pierce, who would have been there in the second round. I like the Jalen Walker pick, really like that pick, good value at their biggest position of needs, but then they go and just ruin it by trading a future first round pick to come up to 26 for James Pierce. I've spoken on here before about how I think Terry Fontenot is a terrible GM, and this only furthers it. I have no idea what he's doing. First the Kirk Cousins debacle, and then this. I mean, don't get me wrong, of course, if Pierce works out, then we don't talk about this. But I think it's more likely that Terry loses his job within the next year, if I'm totally honest. Was completely taken back by that. And then finally, it did get a little bit exciting towards the end when Josh Connolly and Josh Simmons were both still on the board. I've spoken about offensive line. Maybe it's not a position they'd have gone unless some guys fell, and they were the two guys. I mean, Josh Connolly was probably my favourite prospect at offensive line that maybe could have had any chance of making it to the Browns. They both are there after the Lions pick at 28. You're thinking maybe one of them is going to fall and the Browns will have a chance to, take one of them at 33. But the Commanders go and take Josh Connolly at 29. And then the Chiefs stop the Josh Simmons slide at 32. So would have liked to see both of them added to the, potential targets that the Browns could have gone early day two. But unfortunately, that's just how the draft works. Sometimes these guys get taken just before you. And shout out to Donovan Jackson as well, getting drafted number 24 overall. He went ahead of his teammate Josh Simmons. I've been high on Donovan Jackson. I've, said how much value he would bring to an offensive line with both, guard and tackle versatility. He's probably better as a guard, yes, but I think he could be a decent tackle if that's something something that a team wanted to do with him. So credit to him, well done to him. Emeka Egbuka as well, getting drafted in the first round, another Buckeye. Going to the Buccaneers, bit of an odd one maybe. I mean, they've got Goodwin and Evans there already. But I think the thing about Emeka Egbuka is, depending on what team drafted him, because, he's not a wide receiver one. He is more of a secondary option, more of that kind of Robin option. So that might work out really well for him going into a situation like the Buccaneers. But, good to see some Buckeyes get drafted in the first round, of course. But that will do it for me today, guys. As I said, I've had a bit more of a sleep on it. I've had a bit more time to digest it. Yes, I was disappointed in the moment. Yes, I am going to be disappointed every time that I see Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter go put out a highlight on every Sunday. But in the end of the day, the Browns got great value. They put themselves in a fantastic position heading into day two of the NFL draft. And they still got Mason Graham, who in my opinion, headlines those second tier guys. He's still a arguably top 5 player in the draft and someone that could provide, a lot of impact to this Browns defensive line. So I don't think we should be all doom and gloom. I know some people are going to be annoyed, but as I said, Browns are in a great position heading into day two. and I'll be here covering every move that they make. So if you do enjoy my content, guys, please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and even if that means only getting to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Enjoy day 2 today. Hopefully you got a bit more sleep than I did. Enjoy day 3 tomorrow as well. Certainly, you know, round 1 might be over, but there's still so much more to come from the draft. So make sure you enjoy it, and make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my content. But as always, guys, most importantly, go Browns.